Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Naber. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey there, team. Today we have my good buddy Gordon Tobin on the show out of San Francisco, California, originally from Dublin, Ireland. Gordon is the Director of Enterprise Sales at Headspace. Headspace has a $320 million valuation. They've raised $75 million in capital. Before joining Headspace, Gordon was at LinkedIn for about 9 years. He had 6 roles in 4 different offices spanning 3 different continents. 2 of his most recent roles were one as the global head of the business leadership program, and then most recently he was the sales leader in the sales solutions business. About a year and a half after Gordon joined LinkedIn, they IPO'd in 2011, and then they were purchased by Microsoft for $27 billion in 2016. Gordon Tobin, awesome to have you on the show. Very privileged. Oh, one of my favorite
I'm not going to hear you.
Cheers, buddy. The pleasantries are not just surface level. One of my favorite people. So what I want to do today is run through a bunch of different stuff. One of the more insightful business minds I've been around, have a privilege to work with, both on a few different projects, but also observe from both close and afar. And what I want to do is probably start going through a little bit of your background, your personal journey. Got a really cool, interesting family background. You've been all over the world, traveled all over the world. I've got an insert in here where one of the conversations you and I had a long time ago helped change my life for the better, which is great. And we'll talk about all that stuff. But why don't we start maybe 5-7 minutes around what Gordon Tobin was like growing up, and maybe what you were like growing up as a kid in school, and then we can get into some interesting things you're interested in, or some jobs you had, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks again for having me on. I think, where should I start? Dickens, I am born. I think, for me, my early memories, if we want to go back that far, are very, very happy ones up until about the age of about 6 or 7. 6 or 7, won't go into all the drama, but parents parted ways, things financially didn't go so good. And I think at that age, very early on, I had to learn how to be self-reliant and self-sufficient, and also had to learn how to adjust quite a bit, because there was a lot of change in my life because of the personal circumstances outside of my control over the next 10 years. So if I was to characterize Gordon up to 7 as very happy-go-lucky little child, from 7 to 17, 18, I was a wild child. I was not a great academic. So for all the folks who maybe didn't get an A++ in applied mathematics or economics, I can assure you that that's not the be-all and end-all. Whilst I was not a great academic, I think I thoroughly enjoyed my education. I had so much fun in school when I chose to attend. And I think the turning point for me was I just finished up the equivalent of my leaving cert in Ireland. By the way, I'm an Irishman, so there's a difference between what you see and what you hear or see in my LinkedIn profile. It's because my mother's from Trinidad and Tobago, which I'll touch on in a minute. But I think for me at 17, it was a turning point where it's I could have gone down one road, which was not a good one. And that was the road of I have not achieved academically. I will go down a trajectory or a path that's not the most bright and inspiring. Or I could double down and really try for the first time in my life hard at studying and then just putting in my effort. And I probably, retrospectively looking back at it, put in about 80% effort. Did pretty good, got into the second best university, or the best I should like to say, but apparently according to rankings it's number 2 in the country, University College Dublin. Studied English and sociology. I did a master's there in business. And what was a big turning point for me there is growing up, particularly during that turbulent period, being intellectual or academic or anything of the kind was not something that was celebrated. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. And so I was a closet reader and intellectual.
Cool.
I read every single girls' children's book there is, because up until the period of 7, we had a big library of girls' children's books. And then after 7, we didn't buy too many more books. I read every Enid Blyton, Famous Five, The Adventures of the Babysitting Club. I could tell you them all, everything on the shelf. And I used to remember reading voraciously under my covers. But the reason why I say this is because I hid that until I was 17. When I got to university, suddenly education was something to be celebrated. Suddenly people were not talking about jobs. They were talking in the context of a career, and they were talking about meaning and purpose. And the upbringing I had post 7 years old was very much a little bit further down the Maslow hierarchy of needs in terms of just making sure like the ship was steady. And so it opened up a whole new world for me. And after some time there, I did some travel around the world, as I think you might be aware. I lived in a tent for 9 months in Australia. I surfed all throughout the world, from right through Southeast Asia, Australia. I lived in a commune. I was in New Zealand. I was in the States. I was in Central America. Came home 2008, big recession. Lehman Brothers failed around that time, you might remember. Ireland fell off the side of a cliff. And lucky little old me, I got plucked out of that recession by what was at the time a little known startup called LinkedIn. I was employee number 6 in the Dublin office. I think they're like 2,500 now or something. So I won the lottery ticket and I was invested in by that company. And over the next like 8.5 years, I spent time in Dublin. I moved out to Australia. I opened offices there. I came to San Francisco, started off a training program globally for all our graduates, and then went back in and ran a sales solutions business for a few years. And then most recently, to present day, in my last 6 months, I'm in my new role leading sales at Headspace, which is a mindfulness meditation app company. So hopefully, I'll pause there. That's like the brief history in time. Hopefully that was brief enough and not too verbose, but that gives you kind of a flavor for my journey.
Mate, that was great. That's great. And we'll kind of hop through a few of those jumps you made, both before LinkedIn, at LinkedIn, afterwards at Headspace. Headspace, $320 million valuation, $75 million raised, rocket ship, really fast growing, incredible product-driven company, which is really cool. LinkedIn, of course, $27 billion acquisition by Microsoft. You're there very early. I was actually just looking at a photo that I saw. Somehow I found this on Facebook, a photo of Bob Moody taking a picture of it was Bob Moody took a picture. It was like 8.5 years ago of you and Adrian wrapping shoe boxes, and it's
I actually have the same picture. Yes, that was literally a holiday time thing. Wrapping boxes, but that was back in the day when we were literally taking our laptops out of their boxes and setting them up ourselves. We didn't have IT at LinkedIn those days.
I do believe it. An a tech company not having IT, incredible. But the caption was hilarious. Gordon and Adrian wrapping shoe boxes. Period. Non-revenue generating activity.
Yeah. That was brilliant.
I thought that was hilarious. Anyways, the point is really, really early getting onto the LinkedIn ship, and lucky we both were. And lucky that we got this. Yeah, so cool. Such a cool ride. And then your jump to Headspace, very, very smart move as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So along the way, you've made a couple jumps. So let's talk first about your you just got back from let's see, you just got back from living in a tent for a long time, I think. In a
commune.
Amazing. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. But was your first role BOA, Bank of America, when you came back?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
So so tell us, just give me a short blurb on what you're doing at BOA.
Yeah, so I was in collections. So for delinquent credit card debts, I was a collections agent. And then that was your primary remit. Your secondary remit was to, and this is part of, I was an unwitting cog in a larger wheel that was the securitization of debt against people's properties. So basically making sure that their credit card debt was secured against their home. And if they didn't pay their debt, they would lose their home.
Compounding effect. Compounding.
Yeah. And I mean, we all know where that led 10, 11 years ago. But from my point of view, the day-to-day actually was really good because I sat with a headset for 9 hours. The thing would go, boom. A bunch of notes would pop up in front of me telling me like what the person's situation was credit-wise or what we wanted to do. And I would deal 9 hours a day straight with a half an hour lunch break in some pretty difficult conversations. And I learned how to be compassionate. I learned how to really listen and not wait to butt in while the other person's speaking. And I learned how to be resilient in that kind of environment. And I think actually like working there and having like some tough experiences early in life really built in me a shield of spirit that has protected me from the things that have happened throughout my life. And that has just led me to relate to those experiences differently and construct meaning around them in a positive way.
I think it's both apparent professionally and personally when anyone spends more than 1 minute with you, which is, I think it's an amazing testament. Very cool. Okay, so from BOA, you moved to Nomad's World Hotels, and you lived in Byron Bay in Australia for 6 months. And quote unquote on your LinkedIn profile, possibly the most fun job ever. What was your favorite part about that job?
The sense of community. There was 150 of us. We woke up, we shared our resources, we surfed together in the morning, the early morning, catching the most beautiful glassy waves. The backdrop was like this tropical kind of jungle. It was one of the most beautiful beach breaks in Australia. And we would come back, we'd eat together, we'd work in a hostel. I'm a salesperson, so we'd find ways to make money. I think broadly we'd sell anything we could, from cold cans of Coke on the beach to whatever we could. But I think it was that sense that we were all pulling together in unison in pursuit of a common purpose, which was really a community that was based on nothing else other than looking out for your fellow brother or sister and making sure they were well taken care of. And we did that through surfing. We did it through music, and we did it through breaking bread together. Mealtime was a very important time where we pooled our resources to come up with the best meal possible. And for me, it was just like amazing. I worked front of house at the hostel, so I knew everybody nearby. And then like a small part of my job, I think you might read on my profile, was removing poisonous snakes occasionally when I came into the hostel. So,
it's so scary. Brown snakes are no...
snake catcher, and the whole sales thing doesn't work out. I do have a little bit of experience there, so don't forget that. If you're watching this podcast, you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, that was
so funny. I pulled the headphone jack out of my headphones. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I've got you. Yeah.
Okay, good. That was at Arts Factory in Byron.
Yeah, the Arts Factory in Byron Bay, which I think most people who've gone up the east coast of Australia will have heard of it, if not stayed there.
It's a high traffic place.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. And then, let's see, after that, you went traveling for probably another 6 months or so after you were in Byron?
Yeah, so after Byron hit the road, we went up the entire east coast of Australia. Then we went, we met a bunch of people in Byron, so the people we met said, come stay with us. So for the latter half of the 6 months, we just couch surfed and surfed literally. Got a combo in. We went up the east coast, went all through Queensland, got up, did Fraser Island, did Whitsunday Islands, all that kind of stuff. Which is, by the way, if you haven't been, one of the most aesthetically beautiful places on earth. Anybody who listens to this, I would strongly recommend you take a visit there if you get a chance.
Gorgeous.
I went to New Zealand. We have pals there. We surfed down there, old school, in much, much, much colder waters in New Zealand as well. Then went from there to Los Angeles, spent time in Los Angeles and Culver City, above all places, backward and forward to Texas because I made a very good friend from Austin while I was in Texas. And then we went straight down into Central America and continued surfing through Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Panama as well. So it was pretty, yeah.
What a journey.
Yeah, I think that the funds ran out. My father was a little bit ill. He's much better, thank God now. But all the cosmic fingers, if you will, were pointing towards Ireland and returning home, and that the year travel had served its purpose in terms of my wanderlust and what I was after.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so you came back, followed the cosmic signs, and came back to work as a recruitment consultant in Dublin. Tell us, give us a minute on that.
I'll give you a bit of back context first. So when I returned back from a year of travel, as I mentioned, in 2008, Lehman failed. I think it was October 17th, if memory serves.
Yep.
But I came back to an Ireland that was deep in a very bad recession. So if you were male between the age of 18 to 25, there was a 50% chance you were unemployed. I have a core group of friends who I've known since I'm about 6 years old. And for a variety of reasons, I'd say 7 of the 10 are still long-term unemployed since then.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there's a tale of two cities, I think, in the Irish economic resurgence, depending on which side of that city you're on, north or south.
I was going to say north or south, yeah.
But for me, in the first 6 months I came back, I was on social welfare. And it was a decision. It was coming from this primrose path of dalliance of surfing and all that good stuff I was talking about in communes to Ireland, grey, dreary, and also a communal consciousness of it was socially acceptable to not give up, but to congregate with your other unemployed friends and drink beer or do whatever and complain about what was going on. And I think after a few weeks of reacclimatizing to the situation, realizing that my like I did not like going to social welfare once a week, picking up 117 euros and trying to make that stretch in my mom's house. And that was not something that was like I was going to tolerate. So in a previous life, I'd boxed quite a bit, and I decided I was going to get up every morning, and getting a job was going to be my job. And so I get up, I train in the morning, I would spend several hours online, LinkedIn, lots of other places trying to find jobs, and then I would go to the boxing club in the evening, as opposed to doing what other people were doing, which is the socially acceptable thing at that time, which is saying, the government messed up and like, was outside of our control, and the whole country's going pitfall, so I'm going to follow that. And like, I'm not saying that to blow my own horn. I just made a conscious decision that I was not going to get into that mindset. And so I trained physically and mentally every day, and like went through some really hard times. Like there was 17 euros extra per month for the internet so I could apply for jobs. And like that was a real expense in our household that my mother complained to me about. And so for me, it was the period before I went into recruitment was 6 months of welfare. And then when I went into recruitment, I'm trying to like call people to like let me work jobs that don't exist while the whole country's being laid off. So really recruitment for me was, I'm first of all eternally grateful that they gave me that job, and I learned a lot about talent, which maybe we'll touch on in a little bit. But that's where I really learned the value of resilience and also gratitude, because even though that job was terribly difficult in a macroeconomic climate that was the worst in the history since the start of the Irish state in 1929 and the first draft of the Republic in 1931, I believe it was, even for all those hardships that were part of that experience, like I learned so much. And so then I don't want to fast forward and ruin the end of the movie, but you go to a place like LinkedIn and they start talking about things like career and all the good stuff going on there culturally. For me, that was like a little bit of a walk in the park compared to what I had experienced in the previous few years of my life, sans surfing around Australia.
So a quick question, because I want to get into LinkedIn, but there's just, I wish we had 10 hours for this episode right now. So how do you remind yourself of that experience on a daily, weekly, monthly basis now when your circumstances are vastly different from when they were back then? How do you make sure that you remind yourself what's the maybe like mental process or, peg that you put in your calendar or whatever it is? How do you remind yourself of making sure that you're grateful from going from where you were at that time to right now?
Yeah, there's a few ways. One, I'm engaged. I'm a bit of a meditation guy, so I meditate 4 times a day, and part of that is a gratitude practice. Second thing is I've a very strong connection to my roots back home. I've always felt an otherness because I'm unusual. No matter where I am, even at home, I'm slightly unusual, given my mixed race background. But I also never want to forget where I came from and what my family did and the sacrifice we had to make to get me to be on this point, even just to be on talking on this podcast with you. And the last thing, and this is one that I learned at LinkedIn and even had some coaching on it this morning, is the ability to zoom out. When you are in the weeds in the problem, your mind can be a skull-sized prison, and the imprisonment can be so total that the prisoner does not even know they're locked up. And that is a very dangerous place to be. But if you have the ability to zoom out and say, okay, my momentary struggle or trouble or strife or turbulence or whatever is going on at that time, if you can zoom out and say, well, look, on the spectrum of things in the grand scheme of life that will happen to me, like getting married or a bereavement or like all the kind of big life events, like where does this really stack up on a unit sense against that? And if you zoom out far enough and you think about it, you're like, actually not at all. And in most cases, if I ask myself, am I going to care about this in the same visceral, emotional way now in a year's time? The answer to that question is always no. And part of the reason for that is, and I don't want to labor the point, but our default setting is to live in our own heads, and our own emotions are so immediate, so available, so urgent, and felt like they have to be dealt with in that moment so urgently. But the reality is they, like all things in life, are passing and transient. And so your ability to step back and observe those and let that process happen and not become the emotion, but observe it and be curious and learn from it, can help from the resilience path and like bring you through almost anything in life, in my opinion. We have a choice in terms of how we construct meaning around our experience, if you're aware enough to make that choice and stop.
And everyone listening, just remind themselves of what I just said around, like, if you're around Gordon for more than like 1 minute, you realize this guy is enlightened and deep and amazing perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Nice.
So you jumped into LinkedIn at that time, and that means a whole lot of different things for you personally and professionally.
Yeah.
When you jumped into LinkedIn, you had a whole lot of responsibility thrown at you from a sales, new market perspective, new boss, and everything was young. As you grew up at LinkedIn, you met an enormous amount of fascinating people. And one of the things that LinkedIn is notorious for is building an incredible culture and hiring great people. If I'm thinking about the people that embody that, and I'd like to hear talk about it, you're very high on that list of people that I'd like to hear. What are some of the frameworks or principles that you think about at both LinkedIn that you took away of a business that is just world-class at building culture as you go into, and as you're now in Headspace? How do you think about building cultures, especially as you're building new teams, taking over new teams? How do you think about that? What's the framework that you use in your mind?
Yeah. So the framework that I use is one I've learned at LinkedIn. And so for me, culture and values, if you are it's really actually a question about integrity for me. So there you'll have a set of cultural tenets and values, and they are things, your statement of self, both your current self and your aspirational self. And it's also a set of like guiding principles in terms of how you will govern your actions and your decisions on a daily basis. And I think particularly in a sales context, but anywhere, I think Peter Drucker might have, I'm paraphrasing, but says culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's so true. And for me, it's like, it's doing business through values. That just because we're in corporate America or corporate wherever you are, this is, you can run a really good business, and you can also teach people really good human values and the right way to do it with integrity and through honesty. And so for me, in building that, when I came into the team in Headspace, I asked them those questions. We sat down, we took a full day, because I wanted them to understand how important the cultural bedrock of everything we do, how that affects everything. And so we took a full day where we whiteboarded it out. And I was like, who are we today? I don't know exactly. You guys know better than I do. Tell me who we are. Tell me who we want to be. And then let's talk about some ideas that will govern actions and decisions. And so, I mean, there's a bunch of them. I could give you examples. But like, say, LinkedIn, one of the big ones was members first. So we're always going to put the free member before we put our customers. Because without a healthy member ecosystem, you don't have a B2B business to build on your B2C ecosystem. And so every commercial decision was not made at the expense of compromising that value. And so when I say it's an integrity thing, it's a question of there's a list of things that we believe to be true in terms of our current state and who we want to be. And they are things we are not going to compromise on, even if that hurts us financially in the short term. And we have to have shared agreement on what those things are. And then they manifest day to day in different decisions that you make. The conversation will come up, and I will actually think about the culture and the values we've created. And is there a culture or value tenet that can drive or help at least guide the decision-making process? And that for me is like key. If you don't have that stuff laid down, it's not a very nice recipe for a very tasty dish. We'll put it that way, in my opinion.
Nice. Good analogy. And I've heard you talk about set, demo, and hold the culture from the perspective of how to apply this from a leadership, management, and ground up perspective. What does that mean when you say set, demo, and hold?
Yeah. So like culture in a lot of companies can just be a didactic little parable that sits on a polished thing on a wall that people don't know what it is. And awareness of something is different than commitment to it. And so for me, it all starts, everything from a cultural standpoint starts at the top. And so if I as a leader say that precision and execution on something is important, or in like compassion in how we collaborate with our cross-functional partners and some of the more complex deals we're involved with is important, and we expect folks to live by those things, And so I think if you don't have that common set of rules in place, it can be really difficult and challenging down the road to manage the business. But if you do have it in place, you're setting yourself up for the right foundation. But that is like after talent. That's the starting point.
Got it. And how do you bring that into measuring? How do you bring that into measuring and measuring engagement, performance based on culture? How does that proliferate throughout the organization, both from a leadership management perspective and then trickle down? Because you're mentioning it's top down.
Yeah, so I think like on the top down, it's like, to your point, I'll just use the parlance like set the standard, demonstrate the standard, and hold others accountable. Like whatever cultural tenets that we agree to, it starts with me or the CEO or whomever is setting the culture. But if she says X is important, she's got to live that and she's got to demonstrate it. And if she can't live it and demonstrate it, then she's not in a position to hold other people accountable to it. That's where I think I'd kind of round out that answer. I think on can you remind me part B of the question?
Yeah, sure. So how are you making sure that comes out when you're thinking about measuring engagement and measuring performance of people? And then how do you make sure that proliferates throughout the business through leadership and management as well as bottom up, acting that out?
Yeah, so I think it's like from an engagement standpoint, it's rewarding those behaviors that are like befitting the culture and helping perpetuate and grow and inculcate the culture.
Can you give me a couple examples of that on, how that would happen? Where like what's the setting? Yeah. What are you saying? What are you doing?
I should give you a really good example. Only came up yesterday. So someone who was quite junior level, not junior is the wrong word, but a little bit earlier in career, we'll say, wrote a direct email to the executive staff pointing out some things that she felt like we could be doing a better job on. And there's a value within Headspace that I really love, which is courageous heart. And it's having the ability to step up and speak your mind. And if something feels a bit weird, even if you don't fully understand it, like just flag it and have the courage to do that. And I think this particular individual was very brave in doing that. And just because like it's a normal human social hierarchical thing to raise the flag on something like that is like, takes a lot of guts. And I had a huge amount of respect, and it was called out at the all hands as something to be celebrated. And I also think then there's rituals of celebration around that. And so how do you reward that? And I do it through our staff meetings. I do it through all hands. And so if people are living out the cultural tenets of the company, I called it out first actually ahead of the results, because I believe the results follow the culture.
Culture breeds results. Result doesn't breed culture. Not chicken and egg. Let's talk about talent. Let's talk about talent. So when you're thinking about hiring great teams and a set of like maybe a framework or a set of principles you use as you're going through that process, how does that play itself out for you? What's the framework? What are the set of principles that you use when you think about making sure you bring the right person in, engage that person, and retain them?
Well, let me say this first. If there's anything that anybody takes away from this podcast, is that like talent should be the most important thing you're always thinking about in your business, no matter what your role is. Whether you're the CEO or a sales dev rep and you're like you're making referrals or you're making big time hires or whatever, throughout your entire career, your ability to have a nose to pick out talent is like going to be the most important thing you do. Making the right hiring decision is like P1 in Gordon's opinion. And there's a lot of energy coming through now in my voice, but like, please believe me that like talent is number one. In terms of frameworks and like philosophies, how I go about it, Brandon, there's loads of, I've hired probably in the region of about, I think, 400 plus people directly or indirectly, and like 30 plus direct or something like that. Anyway, point being, you need to align on a set of beliefs and competencies that you believe that if someone possessed these, that they would be successful in this role. That's actually really hard because the taxonomy of skills versus job titles, as I'm sure some of your listeners will be aware, is not exactly a perfect system. And so I think you have, that's the first challenge. But I would say getting really clear on like, what are the 3 to 5 things that this person must be able to do? And then it becomes, how do we objectively test for those things in a consistent manner, which is extremely important. I also think you want to give yourself as diverse a candidate slate as possible, so you can hear a multitude of different perspectives, asking the same consistent answers to questions. That will really inform the gaps that you can and cannot fill. And I think the other big thing on the hiring front, after you've agreed to those things and you have ways of testing for them, and I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So let's say you're hiring a salesperson. Like one of my core beliefs with salespeople, or any people actually, anybody for that matter, is coachability. And whether you're running a huge big company and you're the CEO, or no matter who you are, you have to be able to coach people around you, or else you're just going to end up doing their job for them. And so the way we would test for coachability is give you a scenario and say, hey, Brandon, like, you know, you're an account executive, you got an inbound lead coming in, qualify this person, band, pick your thing, and then we'll listen to the call. And so we go through, we do a 20-minute thing, you give the call, and then I give you feedback. Immediately I give you feedback on that call.
Cool.
And then I ask you to take down that feedback. And then what I say is, okay, I'm going to ask you to come back in a week, and we're going to try the same but similar role play again. And what I'd like to see is demonstrable improvement in the areas of giving you feedback. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, great. So now I've given them a week to prepare and recalibrate against some of those things. First thing I do when they walk into the second round and say, what was the feedback I gave you? And if they don't know the answer to that question close to verbatim, it's like, that's not a good thing, put it that way. But thankfully, 99 times out of 100, they do. And it's really a question for me to say, how quickly and how, with what level of dexterity was this person able to adapt to the coaching I gave them? And what was their emotional reaction to that coaching? Because in the interview process, when someone's trying to get a role, is different from when someone's in role and you're giving coaching and feedback on a weekly basis.
Right.
So coachability for me is key. And I think you can test that going week over week by just keeping it quite simple. And that's like one thing I would test for as an example.
That's great. And as you go through that process of interviewing thousands and thousands of people to hire hundreds and hundreds of people, what is the method you use for calibrating with other people? And who do you include in that process for calibrating the candidates that you're interviewing?
Yeah, first person is definitely the TA partner, and then secondary circle is all my cross-functional partners who'd be involved. So I think anybody they'd be involved in working with, we would want to, again, go through a scorecard of what the things that this person would need to be able to have already done and be expected to do in that job. And that'll be different for each cross-functional stakeholder. And so making sure I calibrate with each one of those. First port of call is always my TA leader. Then we speak to the people that interact with most frequently on a cross-functional basis, have the things we want to test for, think through how we test for them objectively so we remain compliant and all that kind of stuff, good stuff. And then it's a matter of rolling out the process. And I think the big thing there is really, really good candidate management. I think a lot of companies get applications. I think LinkedIn got somewhere in the region like 1 million applications last year. And it creates a candidate management issue. And I think a lot of companies are quite good at sourcing and finding people that they think are good, but different things happen internally or competing stuff comes up and they push an interview or to do something like that. Like, that's terrible from a candidate experience point of view. Like, I go down, I meet people down in the lobby and I shake their hand, I walk them up and I walk them out and I talk to them. And I actually ask the people in the lobby, like, did they interact with you? I'm curious to hear how they interact normally when not under supervision in a contrived environment such as an interview as well.
I love that nugget. I love it. Any 1 to 2 specific interview questions or types of questions that you ask that are very telling in the interview process for what you look for? And I don't mean, again, specific competencies, but like a Gordon Tobin special question where, like, I ask this all the time because it tells me something that no other questions or very few other questions will be able to answer for me.
I'll give you 2 examples. One's a Gordon Tobin one, is not a Gordon Tobin one. So the not Gordon Tobin one, which I always find very interesting to learn about people's early motivations. And a lot of this stuff happens before the age of 7. You're programmed, or so they say. But I ask people, particularly in a sales context, what's the first thing that you did in life to make money? What was the first job you had?
That is a good question.
And I'm curious to know, was that job a function of necessity, curiosity, just natural, innate entrepreneurialism? Was it something they absorbed from the environment around them like osmosis? So that's one. And I think their motivations for that can be quite telling, and the kind of work they did. That's one big one. And I think the other one, for me, as I think about it, just like a general framework or philosophy. I think when I bring anybody in that I'll share that's a little bit off topic, but I think is important, is this idea of near perfect autonomy and accountability when you have the talent in the door. And so this is like probably my main one. And this is like, early in a role, people need direction because they don't know what they don't know. And then they get to stage 2 and they're like, okay, now I know what I don't know and I kind of freaked out and they need more guidance. And then you bring them through the guidance period and then they know what they're doing. They're in the flow zone. Well, most managers, and I've made this mistake myself, is like, oh, that person's crushing it. They don't need my help anymore. And then they get bored and they become an attrition risk and you don't know about it. And so for me, it's like being able to recognize where people are in that curve and developing their talent along the way, and paying hyper attention to everybody, because everybody's in a different place in the competency curve. And so when you think about autonomy and accountability, I aspire to give people near perfect autonomy to make decisions as they want, and consciously try and divorce myself from as many decisions as possible. And the reason why I do that is I cannot hold salespeople or anybody accountable for the end result or the output if I have too much meddlesome interaction in the inputs. So they're free to come and ask for my advice, for my counsel, for me to remove barriers, resources, or get on deals. I don't mind, but I won't insert myself directly in doing that unless, of course, there's like a performance thing going on. But generally, it's like, how do I give this person as much autonomy to do what they need, but also let them know that with the autonomy will come accountability at the end. And where I've seen people thrive is in those environments, but it's hard. And the little analogy I'll give to explain it is, it's like if you had your kid and you're teaching them how to ride the bicycle, and you've got the, like, what do you call them, stabilizers, or the little wheels that come
training wheels.
Training wheels. Yeah. And so they're on their training wheels, and you take the training wheels off and they start to wobble maybe just a little bit. If they're in a park and there's some nice soft ground and some grass, you might actually let them wobble for a little bit longer so they learn the lesson of balance. You may even let them have a little spill so they learn what happens if you don't keep balance, if you don't keep the wheels straight. But if, on the other hand, you saw your child veering dangerously towards some oncoming traffic, you would, of course, jump in and step in. And the challenge with the autonomy and accountability model is knowing the difference between when to step in and when to allow the person to learn from the mistake. And that's really dependent on how existential the risk is of the learning lesson relative to the mistake. But that's a hard one. And I'm a student of that and will be until my last breath.
That's a really good one. Do you have any tips for that evaluation process?
Yeah, I think, like, for me, it's like, you've got to think about, usually this comes up where someone says, hey, I want to try this thing, whatever new way they want to sell something or go to market or some new thing.
Yep.
And for me, it's like, I've probably seen this movie before and have an inkling of how I think it's going to play out. And kind of most of the time it plays out that way. Not always, I'm wrong, like, we're only human. And the question I always ask myself is this a one-way door or a two-way door? So if they're walking into a one-way door and there's no way of backing out, I try and make sure I highlight that for them. If it's a two-way door and they can walk in and be like, ooh, this might not have been the right room, let's moonwalk back out, back through door number 2. That's kind of the analogy I use. And like, this is where it goes back to autonomy. I'm not going to make that decision for the rep. I'll provide the frameworks to allow them think through the process, but I won't tell people the answer, because that's not my job. My job is to hire really smart people and coach them and bring out the potential in them, not provide all the answers. And I couldn't if I wanted to, even if, like, I'm just not capable of providing all the answers. Very few people are. And anybody who tells you they are, I would veer very, very far away from them.
Good one. I like it.
Just a Gordon's opinion.
Nice one. And then, so you've got all these smart, coachable, brilliant people that you bring into the business. You're building culture, set, demo, hold the standard. And you've got to bring these folks into a structured environment that they're going to be able to succeed. Let's start with something simple. What does your meeting structure or your cadence, whether it be daily, weekly, monthly, look like for you?
For sure. So I think maybe I'll speak about it just from the frontline manager perspective, which might be helpful.
Yep.
I think, first of all, in my opinion, the 2 core operating priorities for anybody is hiring and coaching. I'll repeat that again. Talent, coaching. 40% of your time as a frontline manager should be spent coaching. And I would espouse folks on the call, if you haven't maybe Googled the GROW model, there's a bunch of them, but it's a way of asking questions to get the answer out as opposed to just giving the answer. So you want to teach someone how to fish as opposed to just hand them fresh fish every day. That's the idea there.
Love fish.
Yeah. Who doesn't love a good fishing? Yep. But I think, the other ways you've got to bring people along these curves is like helping them. I see myself almost like a Sherpa that doesn't carry the bags. And so I can point the direction up the mountain because I've climbed a bit of it and I've seen, where the pitfalls are, and I can tell people that. But I ain't going to carry your bags, and you got to walk up that mountain yourself, and you got to be motivated to do so. And I think if you find the right people and you give them the right set of direction and you set the right cultural foundations, you're in a really good spot for people to thrive. But you must create the necessary conditions for success, which all begins with culture.
Got it. Awesome. And what percentage of your week would you bucket into each major thing that you're doing? Let's say, let's use the frontline sales manager example. What percentage of your time are you spending doing each particular thing, either per week or per month, however you've thought about it?
Once a week, so hour-long staff meeting once a week. That's where we run through our operating priorities, our OKRs, and how we're pacing against them. We'll have a forecast meeting, which is your typical upside, downside outlook, how we're pacing against that, any things we need to do to accelerate or decelerate what's going on. And then I'll have an hour-long, ideally, one-to-one with every rep, where 5 minutes might just be spent just double-checking event and change in the forecast, if any swings happen in deals. But most of that time should be spent coaching. And then maybe toward the end of a quarter with a couple of people, I put on my non-qualified therapist hat and support people through, those moments that we all have in sales where we're like, where's my number going to come from? And the reality is nobody goes through a sales career unscarred. And so as a manager, you need to be compassionate to that and help support and guide people through those moments when it happens.
Awesome. Favorite or most impactful monthly or quarterly meetings that you have?
Favorite and most impactful monthly or quarterly meetings we have? The all hands meeting for sure, that Rich runs. I think that gives the kind of air traffic control point of view of what's
Good
going
one.
on.
Good example. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think it's really important for a leader to, from a stakeholder management point of view, obviously up, down, and across, but down is so important. And like for me, clarity and transparency are really important. And for a CEO like Rich to build trust with 230 people, that happens with consistency over time. And so I think if you have the same set of operating priorities, the same set of values, your culture is consistent, and every month your CEO, she or he, is coming out and talking to those and reminding people of repetition. As Steve Gergen once said, press secretary is, you got to repeat something until people are sick of hearing it. Like, I'm a big believer in that. And Rich comes out once a month and has that meeting, and I think it's really transparent. It's really informative, and it builds trust.
Awesome. Okay. Actually, you know what? Let's just give a 1-minute summary on the business leadership program that you ran, because it was a mammoth, and I feel like you skipped over that quite quickly. Give us the 30 to 60 seconds on what you did there, and then we can talk about, and then we can jump into what my question was.
Yeah, totally. So happy to talk about it. So business leadership program headline is that's the right word. We wanted to do two things. We wanted to up-level the entry-level sales talent across the sales organization of LinkedIn. And as a secondary, we wanted a longer-term play in succession planning and potentially finding young talent and grooming it for more senior executive positions in the long term. And so the idea was, if we had a different strategy where we went straight to the sources, went straight to the universities, went all around the country, even we got to a point we were hiring people who hadn't gone to university, which is another big topic I'd love to get back on your show and talk about another day, because talent and opportunity are definitely not equally distributed, for sure. But setting up that program was probably the 6 most difficult months of my career, in that we were a startup within a very large company with high expectations. We were looking to compete with the Goldmans and the people who were already had very established university programs. And for me, I think coming from Australia, having little to no experience in anything akin to that role and the remit of that role it was just like a really hard climb. But I would posit to the folks listening today, if I can, from a career standpoint, I think I'm maybe paraphrasing Branson here, but like sometimes you'll get an opportunity in life which you may not feel like you're ready for, but you should jump at it. And that's what I did in that case. And I think in building that out, we've hired over 600 or something people now, which is crazy. I suppose for me, it was very difficult, but it was the most ultimately gratifying thing I've ever done, because for even now, several years later, they call me, they text me, thanking me, asking for advice, mentorship, all that kind of good stuff. And I thrive on depth of human relationships and the quality of them, not the breadth. And to have so many, which is breadth, but that goes so deep, it's just like so gratifying. And to know that I played like just a very small part in teaching them about how to go about business in a values-based way, and about like doing the right thing all the time, even when nobody's looking, even when it's unpopular, even maybe when it's a bad career move. Doing the right thing is the right thing always. And that's what I tried to teach those folks, and hopefully some of them it stuck. And God knows I'm not perfect, but I'm a big believer in ethics and values and integrity and sticking to those things. And that's what I tried to get across to everybody in that program. They were going to learn the skills anyway. Most skills in almost any job are learnable, but it's like the important life lessons that they'll take with them and how they'll treat their employees when they're CEOs of companies. That's what I wanted to get across. And that is what I think we had our biggest win.
That program was immense, and it had a significant number of stakeholders involved all around the world, all over the shop. And then your next role also had a lot of stakeholders. This role you're in right now, a lot of stakeholders. Regardless of the organization you're in, you've dealt with a number of stakeholder management, both challenges, solutions, all that fun stuff. How do you think about stakeholder management, and what are some of the most important things people need to do as they're managing their stakeholders internally?
Yeah, I think it's typical frameworks, up, down, across. Know your audience. I think it's good to have a templated format that, again, comes in the form of your operating priorities. It always starts with your vision, your values, your operating priorities, and then how your business is pacing. I think when you're going up the chain, that's a little bit more brief and succinct. I think when you're going across with your cross-functional peers is to make sure that they're aware of all the dependencies that exist and maybe resource constraints that you have to have perhaps a joint OKR with them. And then when you're talking to the team, it's about rallying and inspiring them around a shared vision. And as it relates to your overall operating priorities and what you set out. And I think if you can do those things, you're in a really good place.
Awesome. Thanks, Gordon. Yeah. I always ask this question on people's birthdays, but I'm going to ask it. It's not your birthday today, but I'm going to ask it to you today. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned in the last 12 months?
In the last 12 months, it's better to be loving than to be right.
Wow. That's a good one. Is that a personal lesson or professional lesson?
Both.
Love it. Cool. Last question. Best career navigation advice you would have for young professionals?
Build your professional life around your personal life, not the other way around. A lot of people take 30, 40 years to figure that one out. And by that stage, in some cases, it's too late. Like, if you've got it, I'll finish on this now. The wealthiest place in the entire planet, and I'm not going too morose here, it's a graveyard, because it's full of ideas, inventions, books, poems, people who loved other people who never told them. It's filled with those people. And so I'd say to anybody, it's never too early or too late to be who you want to be. And if you're listening to this call, don't join and don't increase the wealth of that graveyard. Like, give everything you've got and follow what you want to do, not what others expect you to do. And I think if you do that, you'll live a very happy life. So build it around your personal objectives and make sure your professional life supports those, not the other way around, which is unfortunately, I see a lot of people do that and go through too much undue suffering in their careers. And it's actually, life doesn't have to be like that, believe it or not.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.